Shauna, Adam, hey, congratulations for the Falconer.
Thank you so much, Gig.
Yeah, I think that was a very touching friendship story that you guys actually came up with. But let's just start off with the easy question. How did you first heard of this story?
So I first found this story when I was traveling in Yemen back in early 2011. I was filming a documentary about breakdancing called Shake the Dust. And I met this like 14-year-old blonde American kid who was living in Sana'a and spoke perfect Yemeni Arabic. And he told me this story about how he worked at the zoo and he and his best friend were stealing animals from the zoo in order to try and sell them and to help his family and the financial situation that they were in. So fast forward a year or two later, and I kept in contact with him, and Shauna and I introduced Shauna to the story, and we decided to try and turn it into a film.
Wow. So how did you want to basically write this? Because this is not a crime and punishment story. You guys literally did it as a friendship story. I mean, were there no consequences to all of this?
You know, it's so interesting. I think I grew up in Germany and spent time in the Middle East. And I think when a country is going through a lot of different things like Yemen was at the time, different things become important and different things have consequences, right? So I think that part of our art of telling of this story is in real life, eventually much later, Tariq lost his job at the zoo, but not during any of these things. It was due to other circumstances. And so in real life, they kind of were able to do this much like in the movie without being punished for it. And really for us, it was an opportunity to focus in on their friendship and to tell this story of their different values. You know, for us, this movie is in some ways an exploration of our own privilege as people who have lived in different places, spent a lot of time internationally, and oftentimes are the people that can leave and sometimes don't understand, like, and it's just that like our friends have other priorities that are different than like ours. And so it's really that wrestling with that core of friendship and that seeking understanding for people that are like each of us that has different, you know, Kai's super dedicated to animal conservation and that's important. But Tariq has to save his sister. And so this is a real love letter to that type of friendship that explores that and allows for that and wrestles with those complexities.
Yeah, and I think it was important to us that, you know, the kinds of things that happen in this story are the kinds of things that actually happen a lot in many parts of the world where you have to deal with moral complexity. And we didn't want to sensationalize that. We wanted it to actually feel unsensational and really make the story a love song to the region and a love song to this friendship.
Just like any narrative films, you have to fictionalize some things. How much fiction did you actually, you know, put up into a film like this just to make it more interesting, or did you?
Well, we held pretty close to the original story. In fact, much of the things that we had to fictionalize or leave out were more to protect the original characters. You know, Yemen is definitely an honor shame culture. And so we had to walk a very careful line of making sure that the family felt honored, felt like we were caring for their story appropriately. So there are some things that are actually changed because of that. I'm trying to think of specifics, Shauna.
I think one thing that is really different in the movie that is not true to real life is, without ruining the movie for anyone, but the conflict between the friends is that moment of betrayal and then conflict and then reunion. That's something that is true to the movie, but not true to real life. In real life, these two friends are really closer than brothers, and their friendship has continued to inspire us throughout the making of it. They talk on Skype every single week, and it was such a highlight we brought them both to set. It was the first time that the real life Tariq had ever left Yemen, and we were able to get him out despite the war. And that was like one of the highlights of making the movie for us. So I think it's in some ways that conflict between them is what makes it a great movie, but is not true to real life.
I would say the conflict, which we kind of invented, is symbolic of the conflict that people from two different cultures have to navigate all the time. And we just brought it out in a more sort of, brought that conflict into a more direct way.
Yeah.
So was there a real hermit?
The real one-armed fisherman.
There were many. He represents several people who would have been involved in the original cockamamie plan that these boys came up with.
Yeah.
Terrific. Now, tell us about the location of the zoo that you guys actually found for your production. I mean, it seems like it's just this. I almost wanted to call it a petting zoo, but it's not, right?
It's something in between a regular zoo and a petting zoo. You know, it's not uncommon in that region for there to be privately owned zoos that are open to the public. And so we worked very closely with a family from Oman to use their private zoo that is open to the public and and does have a little bit of that petting zoo element.
There are rides. They're very small.
What was the process of getting the actors familiar with the animals throughout this entire production?
Some of the actors were a lot more comfortable with animals than others. I think because we had the real life Kai on set, who's since the story took place, trained 86 falcons and studied animal conservation and was our animal wrangler. And he's probably the person that I've met most in life that's most connected to like the souls of animals. And so he was the perfect guide for our actors. He really was able to take those who are more timid and kind of take them under his wing and show them how to handle the animals appropriately, but also I think he enthralled all of us with his love for animals. I think I'd never held a big snake like that before, and getting to hold Lara and understand Lara through his lens and through his love for creatures and it was really remarkable. It was kind of a transcendent experience, and I don't say that lightly.
Wow. And many of our, probably all of our animals were really quite safe anyway, including our python, pythons, for those that know, are actually quite docile. If anything, it was our bees that we had to have the most care around.
They were the only animals where we had they didn't ever do anything, but they were the one animal that act in a swarm, are really unpredictable. You can't really communicate with, and you certainly can't he couldn't come in and animal whisper them at any time. So they were definitely the animals that arrived on set, were handled with the most fear and care by all, and then sent on their merry way back to their beekeeper after we wrapped that day. So we had to wrap that day before sunset so that the bees could go home and not get lost. It was really interesting.
Now was the python and the falcon part of that from the zoo, or was that on loan from somewhere else?
No, the python was owned privately by someone else and was on loan from somewhere else. And then the falcon, the original falcon who was supposed to play Amira was pre-trained and living in Dubai and flew away forever before she ever made it to our set. And so we had to procure and train a falcon from scratch while we were once production had already begun. So Amira, the bird that eventually ended up being our Amira, came to us about 2 weeks into production. We were in production for 4 weeks, or maybe about 1 week into production, and then trained for a week. And then the rest of her training happened entirely on camera. And so a lot of the scenes that are in the movie where they're training her are pretty authentically her getting trained. they're not
and then released back into the wild, because I think one of the things that's really unique about falcons is that they don't come back because their spirit has been broken or because they somehow are like disciplined into flying back to the person. They come back because they respect the person that is offering them food. And it's this real symbiotic relationship and trust that has to be built. And so the reason our original Falcon actually wasn't on set is that her real Falconer, his brother took her out for fun 2 days before we were supposed to start shooting. And she was like, "You're not my boss. I'm leaving. Bye." And like left. And so part of what was really, like, quite frankly, nerve-wracking, but also really beautiful and really created some method acting moments in our movie, were the moments that Mira was learning that trust with the boys and learning to choose to come to them and to trust them, and then ultimately us letting her free. So that was, yeah, really profound.
So what we witnessed through this movie was basically like real time connections between the actors and the Falcon throughout this entire production.
Yeah.
Yep. And I would say, you know, the other animals as well, Tariq in particular, you know, there's a bit kind of in the film where Kai is a little more afraid of the snake and Tariq is, you know, not afraid of it and takes care of it at the zoo, which was a little bit rooted in reality. Our actors, Rami was a little more comfortable with the snake than Rupert was, so we wrote towards that a little bit. And Tariq definitely had or Rami, our actor, definitely had a connection to that snake.
Yeah, and Rupert really took on the Falcon responsibilities. You know, he was really with the real life Kai from the very beginning when she arrived on our set to like the very end, working with her, training her. And so he would go over for Falcon time after we would wrap every night. So it's really special.
That's amazing. And for Rami and Rupert, how did you folks discover them? I can't imagine the casting process was easy over there.
Oh, it was so hard. We saw like 200 men or young men for these roles. Adam, do you want to speak to? I can fill in some blanks.
Yeah, I mean, it was we had to. So Shauna and I and our producing partner David cast most of the movie ourselves. We had a really wonderful company out of Lebanon that helped us find Rami. So we found Rami on a scout to Beirut, and just immediately when we met Rami, knew that he was perfect. Like he was who we had been picturing for years writing this film. And then we were just about to go with a different actor for the role of Kai when we got a self-tape from, what's it called, Backstage?
Yeah, we'd like posted on Backstage. At this point, we've seen literally, like at this point, I think we'd like looked at probably 200 Kais, and we looked at about 70 Tariqs, but like we knew Rami was the person. We were able to like shut down the search. And Kai, you know, we'd seen so many people, were down the road kind of with someone else, and we got this self-tape. And I remember I was stopped at a stoplight and I watched it and I just burst into tears because he's just phenomenal. Rupert Fennessy and Rami Sahar are going to go on, I think, to have incredible acting careers. I hope that this is just the beginning and that someday Adam and I can be like, we used to work with them. But Rupert sent us this self-tape and it was so intuitive and such a fresh take on a scene that we had written. I sent it to Adam, and you know, we've worked together for so long that I was like, don't oversell it, Shauna, don't oversell it. And so I just said, tell me what you think. And Adam called me right away. And
then we had them do a self-tape together, which was really cool too, because that was the moment where it was really solidified. Yeah. And it was all, you know, all through FaceTime, because Rami was in Lebanon and Rupert was in New York. But as soon as we saw that their chemistry together on screen, we were like, this is it. So, and
then Alia, you know, that was a real journey. We really lucked out with Noor. She's a TV actress in Oman. And I think one of the things that we hoped for when we cast her, but then really came to fruition, was that she, you know, she's a fierce, independent woman, and she really was a partner to us in creating that role, because that role is based on the real life Alia, but it's also based on other women throughout the world that have been in Alia's situation. And Noor was really able to bring that to life. The scene where she shares with her father that about the abuse, that's a scene that Noor co-wrote with us, where we really like sat there and workshopped it, so it could be true to that place, to that region, to the way that you talk about these kind of things, and to her voice. And so we were just really grateful for her in this process.
That is great. I mean, this is just the beginning of their careers, but it's also the beginning of you two as directors, because this is basically your first feature film for both of you. And one of the lessons they always say is don't work with children or don't work with animals, and you managed to do that in a film like this. How was that overall experience for you two?
Well, it was incredible. I've said this before. We were in Oman for 2 weeks of prep and then 4 weeks of filming, and our 2 weeks of prep were very, very challenging because we were, you know, with the budget that we had, we were constantly making adjustments of things based on finding locations and casting, kind of writing towards some of our casting, and that was a really fun but chaotic process. But the 4 weeks of production were a dream come true. They could not have been more perfect. Now, that doesn't mean that it was a blast for everyone. Our producer, David Jacobson, was working constantly behind the scenes to keep our little train going up the hill. And that was, you know, no easy task. Again, you know, operating on a tight budget in a location that doesn't have a ton of production infrastructure with a small crew. He was able to kind of pull off a miracle and allow Shauna and I to like really just be in the writer and director seat and in the monitor and with our actors, and not have to stress out about all of the things that were going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, we talked about this a lot as we were wrapping, that I had a producing career before this and kind of detonated it to return to writing and directing. And in a lot of ways, it feels like coming home to telling stories that matter to me instead of just supporting other people to tell stories. And Adam, with his documentary background, I think for us to share this experience of making our first narrative feature film together, when we first said, yes, we're going to do this, we're going to take this risk, we want to tell this story, we're going to move heaven and earth to do it, it felt like we took out this huge bet on ourselves. And it was like we owed ourselves, our careers, our families, this like, I don't know, ourselves this like debt of this bet that we'd taken out that we could make something beautiful. And when we wrapped, we both kind of looked at each other and it felt like that debt had been repaid, like the weight had been lifted off of our shoulders and that we truly accomplished what we set out to do. And that's just, it's such a rare experience. And then to be so proud of the movie that we made, I wouldn't really change anything about it. And I've worked on a lot of films and there's always something I would want to change. And one is one that I'm just proud of. I'm just excited to share it with the world. And that feels just incredible. I didn't know that one could feel this way about art that one makes.
That is most excellent. Well, let me start wrapping things up. So what's next for you two? Are you continuing to work with children, with animals in the Middle East? What's going on?
So I'm finishing post-production on a documentary film with NFL player Troy Polamalu and his wife Theodora, and it's about American Samoa and it's connected to the mainland and football. And then I'm working on writing a couple of other narrative features. So TBD on those.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up a draft right now of my next feature project, which is called Alona, that I'll be directing. It's inspired. I grew up in Germany in a castle, and it's inspired by my childhood and kind of an exploration of a mother-daughter relationship where the mother's attempted suicide, and it's kind of set in the realm of magic. So I love telling stories that are just, 5 degrees, 10 degrees outside of our reality, and ways to comment on what we're experiencing. And as someone who's struggled with depression myself and whose mother survived that season of her life, this is in some way my love letter to those who wait for the dawn. And I'm really excited. I hope I get to shoot it next spring. And then I'm working on another project for Netflix as well that I can't talk about.
All right. Well, thank you, Shauna. Thank you, Adam, for speaking to us about the Falconer. It's a beautiful story about friendship, and everyone should actually check it out. So
thank you so much.
Can't wait to talk to you both of you again on your next projects.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.